Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Fossil Friday Chats. And for a second week in a row, we are talking dinosaurs. I know this is very unusual for me, your host, Brittany Stoneberg from the Western Science Center, as well as my co-host.
I'm Gabe Santos, and I'll also be the one calling an emergency meeting later because Dr. McDonald's been acting sus all morning.
Geek references. We got them.
We
Yes,
play
so
Among
today,
Us.
yes, we do. We play it quite a bit. That's what everybody wondering what we do when we're not here talking to you about fossils. That's just what we do. We play video games together, and that's pretty much it. That's what we do with our time.
And blame Dr. McDonald every single
Yeah,
time.
every single time. Yes, joining us today is our friend, Dr. Andrew McDonald. Andrew is the curator of the Western Science Center, so my museum over here. He attained his BS in Geology at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln and his PhD in Vertebrate Paleontology at the University of Pennsylvania. He is involved in research on dinosaurs, mammals, and other fossil vertebrates from the Cretaceous, Miocene, and Pleistocene. Hey, Andrew.
Hello.
How's it going this morning?
Going well. It's nice that it's Friday. Beautiful day here in Southern California.
I am sorry about the whole making you study mammals things. Andrew and I work on some research together, and that's my fault.
Yeah, oh, well, we're letting him talk about dinosaurs today, so that's fine.
I know, like this is the best. Just let him talk about dinosaurs, and I think he's a happy dude, huh?
Yeah, that definitely makes up for the presence of mammals in my professional life. Yes.
I'm sorry. Yeah, so Dr. McDonald is going to be talking to us all about dinosaurs. And as a reminder, guys, if you have any questions for Dr. McDonald, go ahead and put them in the chat. We will get to as many as we can during the Q&A portion of our live stream. So, Dr. McDonald, whenever you are ready, take it away. And for the second week in a row, I know this is unprecedented in Fossil Friday Chat's history, tell us about some dinosaurs.
I'm always glad to make history. All right. Well, good morning, everyone. So today I'm going to tell you a little bit about my research, and then kind of zoom out and look at the wider world in which the fossils that I study occur. So much of my research these days is centered on a rock layer called the Menifee Formation. It crops out in northwestern New Mexico, and this is an area that a number of colleagues and I have been prospecting in and studying for over a decade. So this is a joint project by the Western Science Center, my institution, as well as the Zuni Dinosaur Institute for Geosciences in Arizona, and the Southwest Paleontological Society, which is a volunteer organization out of Arizona. And we're working on land that's managed by the U.S. Bureau of Land Management. So we have permits to work in the area. So the Menifee Formation is an extremely thick package of rock. It's basically just this huge column of mud and sand that's turned into rock, spanning somewhere around 84 to 78 million years ago. So that's in the late Cretaceous epoch. So that's the very last chapter of the Age of Dinosaurs. And specifically, we're in a slice of time known as the Campanian stage. That's about 83.6 to 72.1 million years ago. So the way that the geological time scale is divided goes periods like the Cretaceous or the Jurassic, and then down into epoch, that would be early or late, and then down into stages, even narrower slices of time. And one of these is the Campanian, and that's the stage in which the Menifee Formation was deposited. So the Campanian is a very fortunate slice of time because all around the world, there are amazing fossil deposits that date back to the Campanian here in North America, and as I'll show you, in several other places around the world that have incredible fossils of dinosaurs and other animals. Here in the Menifee Formation, we've only really begun to understand what kinds of dinosaurs and other animals lived in this area during the Campanian. We've named two new dinosaurs, both in 2018. That's these guys. Invictarx, that's the armored dinosaur, the blue guy down there at the bottom of the picture. and Dynamo-terror, which was a new tyrannosaur, so an earlier, somewhat smaller relative of T-Rex. And we'll have more information about the Menifee coming out over the next couple of months, a couple of papers that my colleagues and I are working on. So what I want to do today is just a brief introduction here to the Menifee, and then in a couple of months I'll be able to dive into a lot of detail about what we're working on after those papers come out. So for the rest of my talk today, we're going to start zooming out to the wider world in which the Menifee occurred. So starting with North America, this is what North America looked like during the Campanian. The continent itself was shaped much like it is today, but the geography would have been pretty different because at this time in Earth history, sea level was extremely high around the entire world. There was no ice at the poles. It was a very warm planet. And so here in North America, that meant that the entire interior of the continent was flooded by what we call the Western Interior Seaway. It went all the way from the Gulf of Mexico to the Arctic Ocean and covered everything in between, all the way from Texas through the Dakotas up into Canada. And on either side of that seaway was dry land. On the eastern side, what is now eastern US and Canada, is a landmass that we call Appalachia. And on the western side of that is a landmass that we call Laramidia. So New Mexico, where the Menifee occurs, would be part of Laramidia, as was California, where we are. So breaking down these three different areas, we have Appalachia, the Seaway, and then Laramidia. We have some amazing fossils. Fossils from Appalachia are not nearly as well known as they are from Laramidia. And it's not because there's no reason to think it had fewer dinosaurs. It's just that in Appalachia today, in the eastern US and Canada, we don't have the kind of wide desert badlands exposures of a lot of rock that we can easily prospect. But there are some amazing fossils from Appalachia. This is this beautiful dinosaur skull. This is a duck-billed dinosaur, one of the hadrosaurs, that was published a few years ago. So we can tell from the fossils we have that in Appalachia, the most abundant dinosaurs that we know of were hadrosaurs, these duck-billed plant eaters, and tyrannosaurs, so other early relatives of T-Rex. So there's still much we don't know about Appalachia, but we're slowly learning more all the time. So moving west across North America in the Campanian, from Appalachia, you would enter the Western Interior Seaway. It was a shallow, warm, saltwater sea, and it leaves behind an incredible fossil record in places like Kansas and the Dakotas, Colorado, Utah, all the way up into Alberta and Saskatchewan, Manitoba. Really an amazing fossil record of some truly astounding animals. It's really amazing to think that these things were swimming over what we now know of as dry land in North America. So these are just some of the animals that you would encounter in the Western Interior Seaway in the Campanian. This picture is one I took at the American Museum of Natural History in New York, and it shows really well two of the major groups that were around. So at the bottom of the picture there, that skeleton that's kind of mounted on its side, that's a mosasaur. And the mosasaurs were giant ocean-going lizards. They're closely related to Komodo dragons and monitor lizards. But they could get quite huge. This one is Tylosaurus, and that's you can see the scale of the people there in the picture, but they could get much bigger than that even. And then up above it, suspended from the ceiling, is a plesiosaur. So one little thing I should point out, in case there are any people who would nitpick things, as I would, the particular plesiosaur shown in this picture actually lived a little bit earlier in time, not during the Campanian, but it did live in the Seaway, and it has the same body shape as the ones that were alive in the Campanian, so it illustrates it very well. But yeah, so plesiosaurs living in the Seaway, they were extremely large, as you can tell from that picture. You can see the people below it. This is a huge animal with an extremely long neck. head at the end, and then 4 flippers for swimming. So alongside these giant seagoing reptiles, there were ocean-going birds. There were all sorts of fish. This is just a small sample of them. This is on display at the Carnegie Museum in Pittsburgh. 2 types of large predatory fish that lived in the seaway. And some of these fish were huge. They could be 6 to 10, even 15 feet long. As well as, of course, ammonites, which are the shelled relatives of octopus and squid. They were extremely abundant in the Cretaceous, but then went extinct at the end of the Cretaceous, along with all the dinosaurs except for birds, as well as marine reptiles like the mosasaurs and plesiosaurs. But at this time in the Campanian, the seaway covering North America was absolutely brimming with these amazing animals. And here's an illustration by Brian Eng. You'll see a lot of Brian Eng's art in this presentation. I'd like to give a shout out to him for letting me use these images in this talk. And obviously also for creating these amazing images. He also did the Dynamo Terror and Invictarx painting I showed you at the beginning. So this illustration here that he did captures a lot of the amazing diversity of animals that were living in the Western Interior Seaway at this time. Giant mosasaur biting its way through a giant fish, while a little seagoing bird there picks up scraps. There's some sharks looming in the distance, some other predatory fish, a sea turtle in the background, and even some pterosaurs, some flying reptiles diving in. So really rich habitat and an amazing fossil record of the seaway. So moving back onto land, continuing to move west across North America, we get back onto land, onto the landmass of Laramidia. And Laramidia today is represented by some incredibly productive fossil sites in northern Mexico, the western US, and western Canada. So places like Grand Staircase Escalante National Monument in Utah, Dinosaur Provincial Park up in Alberta. All these contain an amazing diversity of dinosaurs and other land animals that lived on Laramidia. So among them would be some iconic animals like the tyrannosaurs. These were the top predators in Laramidia, like this one, Lithrinax, on display in Utah. So this T-Rex lived later than this. T-Rex actually lived at the very end of the Cretaceous, not during the Campanian. During the Campanian, there were tyrannosaurs in Laramidia, but they were smaller than T-Rex, not quite as massive, but they had the same basic body shape with a massive, powerful head, with extremely powerful jaws, short 2-fingered arms, bulky body, very, very powerful animals, certainly the top predators. Living alongside them were a variety of smaller theropods. So theropods are the group that include meat-eating dinosaurs as well as birds. So tyrannosaurs are theropods. But there are also small theropods running around too, like this. This is Dromaeosaurus. It's a relative of Velociraptor. So this little guy would be about 6 feet long, be about as tall as a turkey. And you can see it has these huge claws on its feet. That's the sickle claw that gets talked about in Jurassic Park, for example. So there was a variety of these little smaller meat eaters running around. There's also some stranger things like these guys. These are Ornithomimus. These are some of these toothless so-called ostrich mimic dinosaurs. Very long legs, they're probably very fast runners, small toothless heads. We're still not exactly certain what they ate. They might have kind of been general omnivores, maybe eating some plants, maybe eating some small animals, maybe some little invertebrates out of the water. So really, really interesting animals. And then also living in Laramidia at this time, we know, were birds. They would have looked much like living birds. They would have been different in some ways. But from a distance, they would have looked like any living bird you might see in your backyard. And so here's one that was found in Utah that Brian Eng has restored, perching on a horned dinosaur's face. So a lot of really interesting theropods, theropod dinosaurs that we find in Laramidia. And living alongside them were a huge diversity of plant-eating dinosaurs. such as these guys. This is one of the ankylosaurs. These are the armored dinosaurs. So Invictarx that I mentioned that we discovered in the Menifee Formation, that's an ankylosaur. It's an armored dinosaur. This is one that's on display at the Royal Tyrrell Museum in Alberta. And it's kind of facing the camera, and the massive bony armored head there at the bottom, and then the armor plates, that's the cone-shaped things heading down the body. And of course, it's being photobombed by a tyrannosaur there, as I'm sure many things were in the Cretaceous. This is another type of armored dinosaur, type of ankylosaur, at the American Museum of Natural History in New York. And again, you're looking straight at it. So these things would have really been built like tanks. They could compare to that a lot, and that's not completely inaccurate. They would have been very wide body, very low to the ground, walking on all fours, and completely covered in these bony armor plates. And there's also the pachycephalosaurs. These are the dome-headed dinosaurs that are very well known from a lot of specimens throughout Laramidia. Some of them, like this one, this is one called Stegosaurus, found up in Canada. And it's known from enough specimens that we can actually, that paleontologists have been able to trace how it grew up. We can see that early in the lifetime of an individual Stegosaurus, they would actually have a flat head, that the characteristic dome of these dinosaurs didn't actually develop until later in their lifetime. So that's really interesting to have a fossil sample size large enough to see really intricate biological details occurring as a single type of dinosaur would grow up. So that's pretty neat. And we also have the two most abundant types of plant-eating dinosaur in Laramidia were the ceratopsids. Those are the horned dinosaurs like Styracosaurus here, as well as the hadrosaurs. Those are the duck-billed dinosaurs. So ceratopsids, really among the most charismatic of all animals, I think, in the fossil record. This is Styracosaurus here at the Canadian Museum of Nature. And it's facing the camera, so it's walking on all fours. The body's about the size of a rhino. But it has this huge head at the front with this long horn on the nose and this bony frill extending off the back of the skull, adorned with spikes, with bony spikes. So in life, those would have been covered by a sheath of keratin. Keratin is the same material that forms bird feathers, reptile scales, our fingernails. So that would have made the spikes even longer when the animal was alive. And there's a huge variety of horned dinosaurs, of ceratopsids in Laramidia. This is one called Chasmosaurus, which had an even bigger frill. It doesn't have the big spikes that Styracosaurus has, but you can see it has this enormous frill coming off the back of the skull with these big holes in it. In life, those holes would have been covered by thin skin. But yeah, it would have been probably a very effective visual display signal on these horned dinosaurs. Now, hadrosaurs are probably the most abundant type of dinosaur in Laramidia. They're extremely diverse and very common everywhere that they're found. And they're also really very elegant, very highly ornamented animals. This one is Parasaurolophus at the Field Museum. So you can see the general body shape of the hadrosaurs. They're not quite as stocky as the ceratopsids or the ankylosaurs. They have a kind of more slender, kind of more elegant body plan. Long, deep tail, long legs, long, slender arms. And then on the head of Parasaurolophus, you can see this kind of, picture's angled a little bit, but you can see this crest coming off the back of the skull. So that's actually formed by the bones that surround the nasal cavity. And so within that crest isn't solid bone, it's actually hollow inside. And these hadrosaurs, like Parasaurolophus, would use that crest to generate low frequency sounds that would travel for a long way And so the crest was probably a visual, perhaps there was a visual display component, but it was also an auditory display and a way for the hadrosaurs to communicate with each other. And each different species had its own unique crest shape, such as this one here. This is another hadrosaur. This is Corythosaurus. And it's got this more helmet-shaped, plate-like crest, still hollow, just like in Parasaurolophus, but outwardly a much different appearance. So there are these hollow-crested hadrosaurs, and there are also solid-crested hadrosaurs, like this one. This is Brachylophosaurus. And so the crest is actually this big plate of bone extending back towards the upper right corner of the image. So that is solid bone. The nasal passages don't extend up into the crest, but it probably would have been a visual display device. So hadrosaurs, yeah, really, really diverse, really abundant. They're found almost everywhere in Western North America in late Cretaceous rocks. But it's not just dinosaurs that lived in Laramidia. The ecosystem that is preserved in all these different rock layers in Western North America really show a huge richness of other animals, including crocodilians, like this little guy. This is Brachycampsa. It's only about 6 feet long. It's related to living alligators. There are also other much larger crocodilians living in the same areas that would look and probably lived much more like a living crocodile. There's also a huge variety of turtles. There were even little mammals running around, lots of amphibians, frogs and salamanders, a lot of freshwater fish, including some really interesting freshwater rays. So really an amazingly diverse assemblage of different land animals and freshwater animals preserved in rocks deposited in Laramidia. So it's dinosaurs, but also we also have this very complete window into all the other animals that were living alongside them. So we're going to move from Laramidia, go north towards Alaska. At many times during the late Cretaceous, there was a land connection between Laramidia and Asia. And so the dinosaurs of Laramidia and Asia have a great deal in common. We see many of the same types of dinosaurs in Laramidia and Asia. And just like with Laramidia, many places in Asia preserve a really copious record of dinosaurs and other land animals that lived during the Campanian. It's also an interesting variety of habitats that is represented by these different rocks in Asia. So for example, towards the coast, like on the east coast of China, the rocks there represent wetter habitats, forested habitats with rivers flowing through them. And in those rocks, they find fossils of giant tyrannosaurs, ceratopsids, and enormous hadrosaurs, the biggest hadrosaurs found anywhere, up to 50 feet long, huge animals. Yeah, so those animals are all very similar to animals that we see in Laramidia. So they're probably groups that crossed over that land connection between Laramidia and Asia. But interestingly, there are some different environments preserved in Central Asia, like in Mongolia, where during the Campanian, about 75 million years ago, the habitat was much more arid than it was closer to the coast. So in that area, it would have been sand dunes with little ponds in between them, a much drier habitat. And some large dinosaurs have been found there, some ankylosaurs, hadrosaurs. But for the most part, it's a fauna dominated by small dinosaurs, like this one. This is probably the most abundant. This is Protoceratops. And it's a small type of horned dinosaur. So it's related to those big ceratopsids I was showing you, but it's about the size of a sheep. And it doesn't have any of the big horns and spikes on its face. It has the frill, which was probably also a visual display signal. Yeah, so extremely abundant, little protoceratops, little plant eater. Living alongside Protoceratops was a whole range of other small dinosaurs, including Velociraptor. So Velociraptor did not look like it was shown in Jurassic Park. In actuality, Velociraptor was about the size of a turkey, would have been fully feathered, so it would have looked much more bird-like than the reptilian animal shown in the Jurassic Park movies. This is a skeleton on display at the LA County Museum. And some amazing snapshots of dinosaur behavior are captured by these fossils from Central Asia, from Mongolia. This is a small theropod called Sittipati, and this is an individual that died while it was brooding its nest. So if you look at this, this is on display at the American Museum of Natural History in New York. What you're seeing here is it's like you're looking down on the animal. It's like you're up above looking down on it while it's sitting on its nest. So the legs are tucked up here, the arms are kind of splayed out to the side, and enveloped by the arm over here on the right side, you can see these oblong eggs. So we can tell a lot of things from this. We can tell that this type of dinosaur laid these oblong eggs in kind of a circular pattern, and that the adults would would brood their nests just like birds do today. So it's really a really cool little example of behavior preserved by an amazing fossil. And then in these same rocks in Central Asia, there's a huge diversity of lizards and small mammals. So types of animals that oftentimes aren't preserved very well. Usually, like in the rocks of Laramidia, we find a lot of fossils of large dinosaurs, but fossils of smaller animals are sometimes harder to find. But in these deposits in Central Asia, small dinosaurs, lizards, mammals are all really well preserved by some really beautiful fossils. So the dinosaurs of Laramidia and Asia are overall pretty similar to each other. There's some minor differences, but overall we find the same types of dinosaurs in both of those places. This is in contrast to South America. So today, there is a land connection between North America and South America. So there are some animals like jaguar, for example, that today occur in both South America and North America, mountain lions as well. But back in the Campanian, these were two completely separate land masses. There was no land connection between North America and South America. So in South America, paleontologists have been finding a completely different set of dinosaurs. So for example, you might have noticed that when I was talking about all the dinosaurs found in Laramidia, I talked about tyrannosaurs and horned dinosaurs, armored dinosaurs, hadrosaurs, but I did not mention the sauropods. These are the giant, long-necked, plant-eating dinosaurs that include things like Brontosaurus and Brachiosaurus. That's because during the Campanian, sauropods did not live in Laramidia. But in South America, sauropods were thriving, especially this group known as the titanosaurs. So a huge variety of these things occur all over South America, including some rather small ones. So there were, ironically, small titanosaurs, like the one here shown in D, that's the little Bravosaurus, and also living alongside larger ones, like Punatitan here shown in C. So these guys lived about the same time, but you have two different sizes of titanosaurs living in the same area. So to give you a sense of the size here, the scale bar there in the picture is about 3 feet long, 1 meter. So Punatitan is a pretty big animal. Titanosaurs could get even bigger than that. But at this time in South America, even though they were absent from Laramidia, they were flourishing in South America. And it's not only the plant-eating dinosaurs that show a lot of differences, also the meat-eaters. So this is an animal called Carnotaurus. It's on display at the Natural History Museum in LA. And general body shape looks like a fairly typical large meat-eating dinosaur. It's got long legs, a large head, short arms. But this is a type of meat eater called an abelisaur. And they are only very distantly related to the theropods I was showing you from Laramidia, the tyrannosaurs and the raptors and birds. Abelisaurs are distantly related to all of those. But they occur all over the southern hemisphere. So in South America, Madagascar, known from some really excellent fossils, including this one here, Carnotaurus. So what's one of the weirdest things about these animals is their arms. So we think of tyrannosaurs as having short arms, and they did have short arms, but the shortness of the arms is really taken to an extreme in these abelisaurs. So you can see it's got long legs, but these little arms right here, kind of in the middle of the picture, they're so short that the radius and ulna, that's the bones of the forearm, so that's between the elbow and the wrist, have become so short that they're almost just a part of the hand. So the arms are even shorter than in tyrannosaurs. And we're not quite sure why, what function they served. Yeah, so in South America, there were no tyrannosaurs. Instead, the top meat eaters were these guys, the abelisaurs. And there's also, apart from dinosaurs, some really interesting, weird groups living in South America that don't occur in North America. And one of them is this type of crocodile called notosuchians. And this is one in particular called a Pleistocecus. So it's known from this beautiful skeleton, that's the skull, up there near the letter A, and then the rest of the skeleton behind it, with the legs kind of tucked up and the backbone and the ribs. And these are really interesting animals. They are members of the crocodile group, but they're not closely related to living crocodilians and crocodiles and alligators. And they also lived on land. They were not semi-aquatic ambush predators. So you can see down there in C is a picture of what this animal, a Pleistocecus, would have looked like when it was alive. And it would have had, the legs would have been erect under the body instead of sprawling out like they do in crocodiles and alligators. So this is an animal that was adapted for running and moving around on land. Would have been about the size of a leopard. And the skull is also actually very, very deep. It doesn't have the kind of flat skull with the eyes on top that alligators and crocodiles have. This is an animal that's adapted for living and running and hunting on land. And what's also really interesting about this particular fossil of this one called a Pleistocecus is that preserved inside the rib cage are the remnants of its last meal. And it turns out that the last thing that this land crocodile ate was a smaller land crocodile. So just also a really excellent example of behavior captured by the fossil record. So that's a little overview of the Campanian world. It was every bit as rich as the world we live in today. The fossil record demonstrates that in Laramidia, we had this amazing variety of dinosaurs with similar types of dinosaurs occurring in Asia because there was a land connection between them. But in South America, very different set of animals, different dinosaurs, and of course these really fascinating and bizarre notosuchian crocodiles. So I will leave it there, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Andrew. Let's see. I talk without hearing myself.
I think we're good.
Right. All righty. Thank you, Andrew. That was a great overview. So many dinosaurs.
The Campanian world was so cool.
We definitely hit our dinosaur quota.
Yeah, with a few crocodiles sprinkled in for fun.
As seasoning.
There's so much diversity back then, but it was like we still really barely scratched the surface on like what the actual biodiversity was like back then, you'd say, right?
Oh yeah, definitely. One of the things that makes the Campanian so interesting is that it does sample a pretty good variety of habitats. Like I said, in Central Asia, that's a much more arid habitat than what we would see like here in Laramidia. So in Laramidia, in Western North America, pretty much all of the really productive areas for dinosaurs, like the Menifee Formation where I work, Grand Staircase in Utah, Dinosaur Park up in Canada, they all represent pretty wet habitats that would have been near the shore of the seaway. So rivers flowing through them, swamps, forests. So quite a contrast to the habitat that's preserved in Central Asia, where things like Protoceratops and Velociraptor occur. So just in the things that we can sample, we see a big variety. But yeah, there's all sorts of different habitats that don't often get preserved in the fossil record. Things like mountain habitats or island habitats don't often get preserved. So yeah, I'm sure it was every bit as rich as our modern world. Yeah.
So cool. Like at this amazing snapshot of time to just kind of look at how things have changed and how things are similar. What is it that we say, like the past is the key to our present? That really is one of those sections that we can learn a lot about, right?
Yeah. You can turn that phrase kind of either way. Past is the key to the present, or the present is the key to the past, because there's some things that we see in the fossil record, the geological record, that we can only interpret in the light of being able to observe things in real time today. So that's our knowledge of the present and our knowledge of the past complement each other. Yeah.
I want that on a t-shirt now.
We should put that in our gift shop.
Okay.
Alrighty. All right. Well, we have some great questions from our chat today. You guys had a lot of great questions. I'm not surprised because this is a good talk and it was all about dinosaurs. So the first one is from Warrior Ray 25. They say, hi, how old is your oldest fossil and where'd you find it? Does location matter when trying to find old fossils?
Yeah, well, let's see. The oldest fossil that I've personally worked with would be probably Triassic. So the Triassic is the beginning of the Age of Dinosaurs. And that's so like the first dinosaurs appeared about 240 million years ago. And at that time, as weird and wonderful as the Campanian was, the Triassic is just mind-blowing because at that time, dinosaurs are only just beginning to appear and diversify. So the dominant forms of life on land are other types of reptiles, or in the case of large herbivores, animals that are more closely related to mammals, which actually I think you guys had a talk about dicynodonts several months ago. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So in the Triassic, there were no large plant-eating dinosaurs yet, or they were only starting to appear in the Triassic. But for a lot of the Triassic, the big herbivores living on land were dicynodonts, which are more closely related to mammals. So I've briefly worked with some Triassic fossils, and that's a really interesting time frame. So the age definitely matters. So when you're looking for fossils, it depends on what kind of research questions you want to answer, what kind of animals or plants that you want to study. It's like, for example, I work in the Menifee Formation because I want to understand the evolution of dinosaurs in Laramidia in the late Cretaceous. So I want to see what was going on with tyrannosaurs and hadrosaurs in that time and place. But if I wanted to, so the Menifee Formation fits right into that time frame. But if I wanted to study, say, the origins of dinosaurs, the very earliest dinosaurs, well, then I would look at rocks that were deposited much earlier during the Triassic period. And so that would mean going to a different area of New Mexico where there are some Triassic rocks, or maybe Arizona, or maybe Argentina or South Africa. or Europe, where there's extensive deposits of Triassic rocks. Yeah, so the age certainly matters, and it depends on what you want to study.
Really quick, if you want to learn more about those dicynodonts, that was an episode by Caroline Abbott, who's at University of Chicago. Also, really quick shout out, because today is Caroline's birthday, so happy birthday, Caroline.
Birthday, Caroline. Happy birthday. Yeah, just a reminder, all of our episodes are on the channel, so you can always go back and rewatch your favorites, catch one that you missed. So just a reminder that we do make sure those are available. Alrighty, more questions. So this next one is from Austin, who's asking, did dinosaurs roar or squawk? What did they sound like? What would the Campanian sound like? We've talked a lot about what it looked like, but what would it sound like?
That's a great question. I'm sure the Campanian would have been very loud at times. So like those hadrosaurs I was talking about with the hollow crests. So we can tell that those the nasal passages inside those crests would have produced very low frequency sounds. And from studying the bony components of the ears of dinosaurs that sometimes get preserved in their skulls, we can see that a lot of dinosaurs like hadrosaurs and tyrannosaurs were adapted for hearing low frequency sounds. So low frequency sounds travel a great distance. So like today, elephants make pretty low frequency sounds. They get kind of low rumble, and it travels for a long distance. It allows them to communicate with each other over a long way. So dinosaurs like hadrosaurs would have been doing much the same thing in the Campanian. So if you time traveled back to the Campanian, say Laramidia, say Utah, 75 million years ago, probably the first things you'd hear would be low rumbles thundering in from distant hadrosaurs.
You would hear,
yeah, not
just kidding.
Sorry. Yes, here we are piping in the Campanian directly from my living room.
Yeah, so you would have heard a lot of low rumbles. You probably would have heard some Cretaceous birds squawking in the trees. There would have been insects, just like there are today, making noises in the bushes and in the trees. Yeah, so I'm sure the Campanian would have been really loud if you stepped right back into it.
I like to do when I'm doing like tours and stuff, I usually have our Dinosaur Joe Hadrosaur puppet, and I'll pretend like this is what Dinosaur Joe would have sounded like. So I do like a really bad, I guess, Hadrosaur impression where I'll be like, and the kids just go for it. But I'm like, if a Hadrosaur probably heard that, they'd be like, no, please stop.
Well, I mean, the thing is though, is that we know from specimens like Dinosaur Joe, which is a baby Parasaurolophus, that the shape of the crest changed as they grew up. So like a baby Parasaurolophus like Joe wouldn't have the big tube-shaped hollow crest that an adult has. So the sound produced, the frequency of the sound produced would change as a Parasaurolophus grew up. So who knows? Your impression might be spot on.
Cool. I'll take that.
Am I wrong thinking that'd be it would probably sound really cute.
Mm-hmm.
Just imagining that. It's going to be adorable. Alrighty. Let me see. You guys have a lot of great questions. Let's see. Where was that one that I was looking at? You guys put in more questions and I lost my place. This is obviously the chat's fault. How dare you? Alrighty. Here's a good question from Mermaid Labs. I know there's discussion about whether tyrannosaurs lived in groups, but when it comes to smaller theropods, do we think that they lived in groups?
Yeah, that's there is some evidence for tyrannosaurs living in groups. There's a site in Alberta that preserves, I think, at least 10 individuals of Albertosaurus, which is another one of these tyrannosaurs that lived earlier than T-Rex and was a little bit smaller. I mean, I say smaller, I mean 30 feet long still. Yeah, so there is evidence for tyrannosaurs, at least, we don't know if that was like a social group or if they just gathered together because of some food source or because of some other outside circumstance. All we can say about that right now is that they died together and were preserved together. We don't know if they lived together in any sort of structured group. For smaller dinosaurs, so like the raptors, like Velociraptor, fossils of Velociraptor itself, I think, are pretty much always found just one individual by itself at a time. There is some evidence for one of the raptors living in North America called Deinonychus that lived during the early Cretaceous in Western North America. And there's some sites that have been described. Let's see. I know there's one in Oklahoma, where they've reported. I can't remember if it's Oklahoma or Texas, but yeah, in Oklahoma or Texas, there's a site that has the skeleton of a plant-eating dinosaur, a large plant-eating dinosaur, and surrounding it are some bones and a lot of shed teeth of Deinonychus. And so, at the very least, that seems to have been at least a group of Deinonychus all feeding on the same dead plant eater. Now, again, we don't know if that was like a pack, like a structured pack, like you would see in wolves. But it is evidence for some type of group coming together, perhaps for feeding in these Deinonychus.
Why haven't you summoned a Deinonychus in D&D yet?
Well, I guess because I can summon bigger dinosaurs.
Okay, yeah, that's true. Never mind. Stupid question. Wait. Andrew, can you hear Brittany?
I can't hear Britt. No.
Dear me, I was muted because I was trying. I was trying to keep my dog from interrupting again. So I apologize, everyone. Let's see. This is a good question. This is from, and I apologize if I mispronounce your name, Geomar. This is a bit of an open-ended question asking, where can I do a PhD on these sorts of animals?
There's, well, I don't know where they live, but there's quite a few good PhD programs out there where you can work on dinosaurs or vertebrate paleontology in general. There's let's see, University of Alberta is a really good one. UC Berkeley. Let's see. University of Nebraska, University of Utah. There's quite a few options out there. If you're interested in doing that, a good resource is to attend some conferences. So you can talk to a range of different paleontologists and find out what they're working on, what kind of projects might be available for you to work on. Attending a conference like Society of Vertebrate Paleontology or a Geological Society of America conference is a good way to find out about that.
Alrighty. Here's another good question. This is from Mesozoic Scar. What type of prey do Carnotaurus hunt? Big or small, especially with those lovely arms?
Yeah. It's a good question. There has been some study on the strength of the skull of Carnotaurus and how much stress it could actually handle. I'm trying to remember. Yeah, I think I should say that studies have been done, but I don't remember what they said, so I don't want to accidentally give an answer.
You mean you're not an endless repository of knowledge, Dr. McDonald?
Some things slip through the cracks, yes. But I know those types of studies have been done on Carnotaurus, so that information I think is out there, at least on like the stress that the skull could handle, and whether the animal might have pursued smaller prey or gone after larger prey like those titanosaurs. But yeah, I can't off the top of my head remember what the results of the studies were. So.
Alrighty, I think this is going to be our last question. So Bryn Potter asks, you mentioned keratin covering the horns on ceratopsids. Fingernails can grow quite long. Is it known how long horn keratin could be? Do you know of any fossil examples of this?
Great question. Yeah. We're very fortunate in some places in Laramidia that they preserve soft tissues or impressions of soft tissues really nicely. Skin impressions, sometimes feathers, and sometimes harder keratin on the face. So like there are some hadrosaur specimens where the keratin covering the beak at the front of the mouth is preserved. So we can see the shape of that toothless beak that it would have used to crop vegetation. There are some really well-preserved ceratopsid specimens with extensive skin impressions. I don't know of any published specimens that show that have the keratin covering the horns or the spikes. So I don't think we know right now exactly how much longer they could grow beyond the bony core of the horn. Sometimes in some of the deposits in China, where they find really well preserved small meat-eating dinosaurs, the keratin sheath that covered the claws are preserved. And in those cases, they show that I think that the keratin adds like another third to the length of the claw. So the keratin sheath could extend well beyond the bony core of the claw. So potentially in something like Styracosaurus, though in life, those spikes could have appeared even longer than they do on the fossil bone, on the fossil skull.
Nice. Really quick, Dr. McDonald, there is a clarification that's been requested in the chat from Steve Dories. Circling back to the D&D dinosaur summoning, is that a druid spell or some type of necromancy? That's a reskin spell for you, right? As a druid?
Yeah, so as a druid in D&D, I can turn into a dinosaur and I can summon dinosaurs. It's great fun.
So there you go. Bring dinosaurs into your D&D campaigns. It's awesome. Thank you for bringing that up, Steve. All right. Well, that does it for us today. Thank you so much to Dr. McDonald for giving this wonderful presentation, and to all of our audience for tuning in today. Today was a really great episode. If you love this program and want to support programs like it at the Alpha Museum and the Western Science Center, you can find links on how to do that below. Join us next week as we are joined by Dr. Katie Smith for A Tale of Two Mastodons. I know Brittany is very, very excited for this one because, Western Science Center mastodons. And as always, be sure to like and subscribe for more stories from the world of paleontology. We'll see you all next week. Bye.